In 1665, William Drummond and a hunting party consisting of his peers ventured out into the Great Dismal Swamp. William would be the only one to return alive. This incident would kickstart an eerie and ghastly mythos surrounding the swamp for centuries to come. Join us as we explore this mystery and others from the fog. Stretching between the southeastern and northeastern borders of modern Virginia and North Carolina, the Great Dismal Swamp currently encompasses around 480,000 acres, roughly 750 square miles, a far cry from the original measurements assessing the area to be 1 million acres during the early colonial period. Historical records accounting the discovery of the Great Dismal Swamp and Lake Drummond vary greatly. Aside from the obvious assertion the swamp was originally discovered by Native Americans, the matter of European discovery is a somewhat contested issue. Lake Drummond is an all-natural freshwater lake. Its waters possess an acidic stain due to organic acids that filter into it from the outlying swamp. Most accounts mark colonial discovery of Lake Drummond to have been in 1728 by William Byrd II, but this would undermine William Drummond's account of finding it in 1665, a full 63 years prior. Giving credence to the theory that the swamp and lake were a well-known landscape are the historical accounts of indentured servants in the late 1600s who utilized the swamp as a place to escape and remain hidden. These were the forebears of the Great Dismal Swamp Maroons who would later take advantage of the swamp's natural protections during the American Civil War. Today, the remaining swamp and lake are considered a wildlife refuge in both Virginia and North Carolina, a tourist attraction surrounded in folktale and modern-day macabre. Here are some of the legends and stories that contribute to the swamp's dark and mystifying history. Much is unclear as to where or how the Lady of the Lake legend first began, whether based on true accounts passed down through Native American history or European superstition. No one can say for certain. The story goes that a chieftain from an indeterminate tribe was to marry off his daughter to a well-respected brave. As preparations began for the ceremony, the young tribal princess unexpectedly died. The tribe fashioned a grave on one of the nearby islands in the swamp and laid the princess to rest. The young brave, overcome with grief, would sit on the shore at the edge of the tribal encampment, looking off towards the island where the princess had been buried. One night he began to notice strange lights that would circle around the island, as if someone was holding a lantern of fireflies. As the days went on and the lights persisted, the young brave became enraged, believing that someone was desecrating the princess's grave. He decided he would discover the source of the mysterious lights for himself. That night, as he paddled out to the island, the brave was shaken. The lights disappeared as he closed in on the island. It was quiet, but suddenly, after hearing branches snapping, he looked up to see a figure staring at him from the trees. After staring back at the figure for a few moments, he recognized the shade as the late princess. Then, the visage quickly disappeared back into the mists, just as he was about to call out. After the incident, the brave returned to the tribe and attempted to convince everyone what he had seen. Needless to say, this news was not well received by the tribe, especially the chieftain. Steeled in his resolve, the brave swore he would prove his tale by returning to the gravesite and attempt to capture the apparition which he had seen. That night, the brave paddled off as he had before. However, he would never return. Some weeks later, others from the tribe began to notice the same lights that the brave had described before his disappearance. However, now everyone claimed to see two figures, one paddling a canoe diligently, and a woman sitting in the front of the canoe, holding a lantern of fireflies as they drifted away into the darkness. Known as Dismal Town, this camp served as a central hub for logging operations in an effort to cultivate and colonize the region. A young couple living in town became engaged. On the morning of their wedding, the groom decided he would go fishing before the ceremony. He had hoped to add extra food to the banquet being held during the post-wedding reception. For the better part of the morning, several town residents witnessed the groom on the shore of the nearby stream fishing. However, by early afternoon, there was no trace of the groom, aside from his fishing gear left where he was spotted earlier. A search party was hastily put together once it was discovered that he hadn't arrived for the wedding ceremony. Hours quickly melted with dusk setting in, compounding what was already a difficult search. The bride, beside herself with grief, decided to search despite warnings from family and friends to wait. She hurried to where the search party was along the shore. As she arrived, most were saying that it was too dark to continue onward, and it would be best to start again in the morning at first light. Unsatisfied, the bride continued along the shoreline with a few men who decided to accompany her. Eventually, they began seeing a light on one of the other small islands just adjacent from their position. According to witnesses, the bride thought it was the groom signaling for help and became completely convinced after she thought she heard him moaning in distress. The bride, again ignoring pleas of concern from the remaining members of the search party, set off in a rowboat towards the island where the light and moans were coming from. It wasn't long before the bride was out of sight. After nearly half an hour without signs of either the bride or the groom, a horrid shriek came from the direction in which the bride had rowed. The remaining men in the group were completely taken back and, fearing that something terrible had happened, decided to split up. One group went back to town to report what they had seen and ask for assistance. The other half would make camp and keep a lookout while they waited for additional manpower to aid in their search. Throughout the night, friends and loved ones who had joined the shoreline encampment would yell out into the murky darkness, hoping either the bride or groom would answer them. Only the sounds of the swamp returned their call. In the mornings, with several rowboats at the ready, the townsfolk resumed their search, this time focusing on the island where the light had been seen. Once the party arrived, they quickly discovered an old lantern completely empty, but no sign of the bride or groom. Months later, during the early evening hours, several people from town began reporting 2 lights burning on the island. Multiple searches would occur, but no clues as to what was causing the lights or the whereabouts of the bride and groom were ever found. A reoccurring theme in the Great Dismal Swamp is of people vanishing without a trace. This has gone on for centuries, continuing into modern day. Trailgoers have reported feeling disoriented and uneasy while traversing the swamp. Veteran hikers will even tell you that it's not hard to get turned around or find yourself on the wrong path, even in broad daylight. Legends say that the swamp has a way of guiding you to where it wants you to be, and sometimes unexpected tourists have found themselves in an area known as the Phantom Graveyard. It has been spotted at numerous points within the swamp itself, meaning the graveyard isn't a fixed location, but rather a ghoulish shifting occurrence. Sightings have been infrequently reported, but all bear similar accounts. First, you slowly begin to realize that you aren't on the same trail from where you started. Soon thereafter, you begin to feel your stomach fall as you become overwhelmed with an intense feeling of dread. As you continue to travel, various makeshift graves, burial mounds, and broken tombstones appear from out of the darkness. Some have reported seeing dark figures slowly roaming around the graves, while feeling as though something is trying to pull them underground. The graveyard is tied greatly into a pseudo legend involving William Drummond and witches. It is speculated the reason William Drummond went out with a large hunting party in 1665 stemmed from a request by his wife Sarah Drummond to do so. Only William would return alive. The bodies of his party were never recovered, and Drummond himself was quite sick for several weeks after his return. What is debated as legend is Sarah Drummond, a woman whose heritage and origin is unknown, was directing her husband on behalf of a witches' coven that resided within the swamp. The men who traveled with William were to serve as a sacrifice in the waters of what is now known as Lake Drummond, though nothing in historical records can confirm this theory. Pieces of William Drummond's account of his time in the swamp only give a small insight on what may have happened to the party. Delirious ravings that William gave during his return seem to point to the possibility that he and his companions encountered what would later be nicknamed the Phantom Graveyard. William recounted finding a desolate place which seemed to be sapping the life out of he and his group. Here, the party could see shambling figures accompanying an ever-growing mist surrounding them. The party continued to tread carefully forward until they noticed muddy mounds where portions of corpses were haphazardly buried. Overcome with fear, the men began to separate into smaller groups, running indiscriminately to escape what they were witnessing. In the end, Drummond would be the sole survivor, but not before obtaining the coordinates of the lake which would later bear his name. When questioned if he knew what had happened to his companions, Drummond acted elusive and reiterated that he was unsure where his friends had gone. A search was organized for the missing men, but this quickly led to even more confusion and created more questions than answers. Over the next several weeks, the search group would share their experiences, which not only baffled everyone further, but caused an incredible amount of fear. On several occasions, the men would see different animals that would vanish into the mist before their very eyes. Most every dusk, searchers would hear cackling laughter on the wind that seemed to come from all around the swamp. There was even talk of rescuers witnessing women running around the vicinity of the lake, who would change into animals at will, usually the form of a deer. A pair of hunters managed to corner one of these shape-shifting creatures with the help of their dogs. Trapped, the deer changed into a woman right before them, spitting at the hunters in a foreign tongue unfamiliar to them. Convinced the woman possessed information regarding the disappearance of Drummond's hunting party, the men tied her to a tree and interrogated her. Shortly thereafter, the woman resumed chanting at the tree, burst into flames, seemingly at the woman's command. The hunters ran away terrified as she laughed and burned. The group returned a short time later to discover the tree burnt, the corpse of the woman gone, but to their shock, the hunters noticed the shape of the burnt tree looked like that of a deer running away. Eventually, the search was called off, leaving the fate of the hunting party unknown to this day. There are other occurrences that point to Sarah Drummond having ties to witchcraft. When William Drummond was convicted and hanged for his role in Bacon's rebellion, his land and assets were seized by William Berkeley, the acting governor of Virginia. William's widow Sarah traveled to England in a bid to reclaim her family's properties by having her case heard before King Charles II. It is argued as to whether the king actually heard Sarah herself, or if a committee informed the king on the issue between Berkeley and Drummond. King Charles II was a known hedonist. It is quite possible that he entertained the widow Drummond and had either become bewitched through witchcraft and decadence, or merely charmed by their discourse. Either way, the result was the same. Sarah Drummond was able to reclaim her family's lands via order from the king himself. This caused confusion and anger to those back in Virginia, who would argue that Drummond, given a fair trial for his part in Bacon's rebellion, was punished accordingly. Gossip amongst the populace began to grow, pondering as to whether Sarah had unworldly powers tied to witchcraft after the incredible decision from the crown. In the public's mind, witchcraft was the only way Sarah could have swayed the highest authority in the land into ignoring all of the facts surrounding William Drummond's lawful execution. To make matters worse, Sarah had been seen sometime before or during the early days of Bacon's rebellion, breaking a piece of straw stating, "I value the power of England no more than that." In hindsight, witnesses to Sarah's act of defiance theorized she was performing some form of minor invocation which would later be completed during Sarah's trip to England. Many in the surrounding area began to link together the mysterious events surrounding Drummond's ill-fated hunting expedition and the multitude of bizarre incidents occurring in the swamp thereafter. Long before his death, Drummond would retract many of his statements regarding his ordeal within the swamp, attributing his original account as being a product of suffering from hunger and sickness. This didn't stop locals from speculating what was fact or fiction. Upon Drummond's execution, his actual burial site became unknown. One theory holds that the widow Drummond took her husband's body back to the lake to be utilized in some pagan ritual. Regardless of the actual truth, missing hunters and strange incidents have continued to persist well into present day. On September 22, 1997, Richard and Evelyn Davis, along with 5 children, were reported missing while visiting the Great Dismal Swamp. The group was found less than 48 hours later, however not before staying at least one night out within the swamp itself. Officials reported that the group somehow got on the wrong path and turned around, causing the vacationers to become confused. After their rescue and discharge from the local hospital, reporters approached Richard Davis for an interview. Richard was littered with bug bites and scratches. He tore off his hospital bracelet and stated, "I'd rather not comment." Thankfully, all of the children were unharmed by the event. Was this just a case of being embarrassed at getting lost, or perhaps witness to some ancient horrors? We may never know. On May 31st, 2015, a cyclist biking through the Great Dismal Swamp Canal ditch came to a stop after being taken back by a foul odor. Quickly, he spied several trash bags off the side of the trail, one with a bone sticking out of it. The police were alerted and after investigating concluded the bags contained the dismembered body parts of Brianna Armstrong. On May 9th, 2015, Brianna Armstrong, a registered nurse and massagist, was reported missing by her husband. She was last seen May 7th leaving work, telling her husband she was going to see her friend, Kim. Unknown to her husband, Kim was an alias Brianna used to cover up her relationship with a lover from work. The boyfriend in question, Justin Cornell, would become the prime suspect in Brianna's murder. Brianna's car, keys, and purse have been discovered on May 13th in a shopping center half a mile from Justin's residence. Additionally, the trash bags found in the Great Dismal Swamp contained a receipt with Justin's name, as well as clothing with DNA evidence linked to the accused. After searching Cornell's residence, police discovered that flooring in some parts of the home had recently been replaced. Though most of the prosecution's case rested on circumstantial evidence, it did seem like there was an overwhelming probability that Justin may have committed the murder. Brianna's husband Corey was also questioned and eventually eliminated as a suspect. Cornell's defense alleged that he was being framed and that the possibility existed that someone else had motive to commit the murder, potentially Brianna's husband after discovering her infidelity. Inevitably, Justin would be found guilty and sentenced to 40 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Brianna Armstrong. Many questions still surround this case. For example, forensics determined that Brianna was alive up to a few days prior before her corpse had been discovered based on its decomposition. Where has she been during the interim from May 7th to May 31st? Cornell had lost his job at the massage parlor where he and Brianna both worked on or around May 15th for poor attendance and demonstrating angry behavior at work. This was 2 days after Brianna's car had been discovered. Why would Justin leave the vehicle, along with every important personal identifiable item Brianna had, a half a mile from his home instead of disposing of it? Was Brianna simply a captive, or did something else transpire which isn't public knowledge? Lastly, why choose a location such as the Great Dismal Swamp to dispose of the body, but then leave it in such a fashion to be easily discovered? Do we have the full story? So much is unknown about the Great Dismal Swamp and the events that have occurred within it. What other secrets does it hold? Is there hidden gold hastily buried by French sailors fleeing British soldiers waiting to be discovered? Are the lights seen at night merely foxfire, swamp gas, or a preternatural signal calling us to some horrific fate? Maybe it's best we don't know the complete truth. Join us next time as we delve into another mystery from the fog.